Hello everyone and welcome back to Chai with Maanya. It's been a while since I've sat down and done one of these videos. I know I have been uploading my normal videos, but it has actually been a month or maybe even over a month since I've actually sat down and recorded something. But I have uploaded a vlog earlier last week, I don't know when this is gonna get uploaded. But do check it out. I just did a fun day in my life. I was trying something different. So for today's topic, we are going to be talking about third culture kids and their lack of identity. And I first got this idea when after I had filmed the Never Have I Ever Been So Disappointed. Check that one out too. When I was filming the Never Have I Ever Been So Disappointed video. And this really sweet person commented under my video talking about her experiences as an Indian immigrant and about things that she had not realized about her own self. And that just kind of got me rethinking about this entire topic about third culture children and how there's a lack of conversation surrounding third culture kids in general. You know, it also got me thinking that there's a huge audience and a bunch of children and adults who feel disassociated and uninterested in their own culture, are unable to identify why, or are just confused about their feelings. And it got me thinking about questions like, why is identity important? Why is culture important in shaping who you are? Why being a third culture kid makes us feel like alien species? Why is it so hard for us to balance our multiple selves? And luckily for you, I have a bachelor's degree in media communications and culture, and I wrote a 90-page thesis on this exact topic, third culture children, and I am here to answer all of your special questions. Before I kind of get deeper into today's topic, I think it's important you guys understand my background, just so you know where I'm coming from and just so you'll be able to understand my experiences a bit better. I am Indian, but my parents are Indian. I was born in India. I'm fully Indian, 100% Indian. However, I have grown up in Japan my entire life. I own an Indian passport. I am Indian on paper. I look like Indian. I do identify as Indian. However, I feel very much Japanese on the inside because I grew up in Japan. I also went to an international school from middle school to high school, so from basically 6th grade till 12th grade, where I was exposed to a lot of Western pop culture, so Western music, Western movies, Western TV shows, and also ultimately I was exposed to a lot of K-pop because I do live in Japan. K-pop is a very big thing here, and then BTS kind of blew up. I was very much disinterested in Indian culture for most part of my life, and especially my teenage years, because no one around me in school was really consuming Indian culture or Indian pop culture specifically. In my grade, there were only two other Indians apart from me. One of them eventually moved away, who is my really good friend. But we never really talked about Indian pop culture. We didn't really consume Bollywood music, Bollywood movies as much as opposed to Western culture. It wasn't until 2022 when I started redeveloping my interest in listening to Bollywood music and watching Hindi cinema again, and I started reconnecting to my Indian culture. Doing that and also being a culture and communications major, it started like naturally got me thinking about third cultures and cultural appropriation, cultural appreciation, all these kind of cultural topics, which is why I ended up writing my thesis on this. I just realized my necklace is shining a lot, so I hope that doesn't blind you guys. Having established who I am, I kind of want to talk about culture because it is so important to understand what culture really is. And I feel like this is one of those things where, yes, people know what culture is, but I don't think people really realize how important culture is to humanity. Culture is basically, to quote the definition, culture is basically shared beliefs, values, customs, and ways of life of a particular group of people at a particular time. So these beliefs, values, and customs include language, food, art, religion, and social norms. And of course, things like language, food, art does make sense when you talk about culture, and you may be like, what do you mean social norms? So to give you an example of social norms, in Japan, Japanese people are quiet in public spaces, they tend not to speak or eat in public transportation, and they tend to be mindful of being loud or being very handy in public spaces in order to respect each other. This may seem like it's just whatever, it's just like something Japanese people do, but it is a social norm here and it is part of Japanese culture. Whereas in other countries, people maybe it's fine to eat on public transport, it's fine to be loud, it's fine to be rowdy in public spaces, and that's their social norms and that's their culture. And now why culture is so important is because culture is the most basic thing that ties people together in society. Culture forms a large basis of your identity and plays a big role in shaping who you are and what you become. We are constantly surrounded by culture all the time, whether it's in our homes, whether it's in our schools, whether it's in our workplaces, whether it's through social media. We are always surrounded by one culture, one form or another. And I also want to preface that there is traditional culture, things I just mentioned, like food, religion, art, language, but there's also pop culture. And pop culture comes from, having shared interest in music, watching the same movies or TV shows, following the same trends. Culture, to paraphrase, is basically the nature of how a particular society works. Similar to photosynthesis. Without photosynthesis, a plant cannot survive. Without oxygen, humans cannot breathe, and likewise, without culture, a society cannot work properly. Having said that, I want to introduce third culture kid. So third culture kid is a term which was first coined in 1950s by Ruth Usaim, who is an American sociologist and anthropologist. She first came up with this idea and this thought through her own cross-cultural experiences while she was living in India with her family. And third culture is basically a generic term that refers to shared behaviors among people of differing backgrounds and who they're trying to relate to their culture. You may be like, that's a lot of words, what the hell is she talking about? So let me simplify this for you. Let's take me for example. My native culture or my home culture is India. My host culture is Japan. These are the two cultures that I have largely been exposed to in my life and my childhood. I was exposed to my home culture, Indian culture, at my home, and I was exposed to host culture outside my home, whether it was in the streets or whether it was in school. Now, what I have done is that I have basically taken these two cultures and I have mixed these two cultures. I have taken parts of both of these two cultures and created a blend which is known as the third culture. My third culture, to be specific. Third culture children often do not relate to a singular culture, but rather relate to multiple cultures at the same time. Now, I have largely been only exposed to 2 different cultures in my life, but other people may have been exposed to 3 cultures, 4 cultures, 5 cultures. A lot of people move around their entire lives due to their parents' jobs. So their culture, their third culture is more unique compared to mine. Like I said, for example, a person like me who is Indian but grew up in Japan, I may relate more to the quiet nature of Japanese society when it comes to public spaces, but at the same time, I may relate more to the more friendly nature of working environment that is present in Indian culture. So both things can coexist at the same time, and overall, third cultures may appear to be weird and kind of odd to others, but they are unique to each individual based on their own experiences. Third culture child, when they grow up, they get referred to as adult third culture children. Who are adult third culture children? So basically, you take all of that information of third culture child and you basically put it in the form of an adult. Adults are often conceptualized as mature, stable, experienced, settled, but the reality is that compared to children, adult third culture children are more likely to struggle. And why is that? As a child, a third culture child is exposed more to other third culture child. And when you become an adult, you have to navigate the world on your own basis. And while you're trying to discover the world, you're also trying to figure out where you place yourself in this world. Things get really difficult and you realize how odd you are until when people start asking you things like, what language is easier for you? Where do you feel the most comfortable? Where is your hometown? Which country do you really belong to? Oh wait, aren't you from that country? But wait, I thought you grew up there. Why do you know so less? Why can't you speak the language? And I know these questions may seem very basic. They may seem like they're not an issue at all. But for people who do not know where they place in terms of culture, these questions are some of the hardest things to answer. Trust me, from experience, nothing sucks more when both the cultures you relate to reject you. I have had Indian people be very, very surprised that I can speak Hindi. I've also had Indian people tell me that I'm not really Indian. Yet at the same time, I've had Japanese people be very shocked that I can speak Japanese, and at the same time have them tell me that I am not Japanese or that I don't really belong in Japanese society. And it kind of sucks because the two cultures I relate most to in this world is Indian culture and Japanese culture. And when both of those people told me that I don't really belong to either, it really does give you an identity crisis. It's like, wait, what? Who am I? Where do I belong? Sometimes I wish I could just create a country which was filled with third culture children and create our own nationality, and maybe things will be easier. While I was doing my research for my thesis, I came across this very interesting quote. And the quote goes like, all the windows are, so life is like Microsoft Windows. All the windows are open and accessible at a given moment, but he can only work with a particular window that appears in front of him at any point in time. Basically, imagine the life of an adult third culture child as a browser. You can be Google Chrome, it can be Safari, it can be Windows, whatever your choice. Now imagine on that browser you've opened multiple tabs. All of these tabs contain information on completely different topics. Now obviously you cannot access all of these tabs at the same time. You can only access one or two tabs at the same time. But to function as a normal human being, you do need access to all of these tabs at the same time. And if we do not pick the correct tab, which we need to function in that moment, we end up feeling like an outsider. I often sometimes confuse which language I'm speaking to. I can speak four languages, but I'm not good at either of them. I'm just average. Sometimes you don't know which certain group of people, what certain topics are okay to talk with certain people, what topics are not okay to talk with certain peoples. And trying to balance all of this can get really confusing at times. So up until this point, you may be thinking, okay, a third culture child sounds way too complicated. There are too many negatives. I will never want to be one. But they also come with a lot of positive aspects. Well, we come with a lot of positive aspects. We appear to belong in a dominant culture, but in reality, we relate to so many more. We're basically like a chameleon. I appear to be Indian. I do look Indian. At least I believe I look Indian. But I can relate to so many more other cultures, and we end up basically shaping our feelings into said culture to relate ourselves more or to basically understand each other more. It allows us to access more people with various different backgrounds, and it allows us to be agents of cross-cultural information. Me and my brother, compared to my parents, are able to understand different cultures more, or just able to blend in with other people of different nationalities way easier. And that's purely because we have had more experience with people of other nationalities as compared to my parents. Even living in Japan, my parents largely still consume only Indian media, or even news, they only watch through Indian news channel. Whereas people like me, we tend to consume even things like news on a more global basis, or we tend to look at things from both sides of the coin more. As I said, because we're able to understand other cultures more easily, we are able to blend in more easily as opposed to others. Now let's say if my mom was to move to a different country, she's gonna have a harder time adapting to that country's social norms or adapting to that country's cultural practices as compared to me, because I have had an exposure through my international schooling experience and through my third culture experience of meeting people with different backgrounds and different social norms. I will kind of have an easier time just adapting to that country's social norms. And honestly, once you've mastered which tab you need to operate in, it is fun. For example, a big quirk of mine, but I don't know if it's quirk, but a big trait of mine is that I tend to switch accents depending on who I talk to. And it's funny because I know I do this, and I've had some people point it out before, but at the same time, I do it unconsciously and I don't realize I've done it until I've done it. I remember recently when I was at work, I was surrounded with a lot of Indians, so I was speaking in a more Indianized English accent. And then I was speaking to someone else and I spoke in my normal accent, which is what I'm speaking in now. And a girl pointed out, "Oh, hey, you changed your accent." And I was like, "Yeah, actually, I do not speak in my normal accent when I speak with you." Even when I'm with my family members, I tend to say certain words differently. So in English, we say Japan, but in like Indian English, you say Japan. Or just in Hindi, you will say Japan. And whenever I'm with my relatives or whenever I'm visiting India, I'm always like Japan, Japan. But whenever I'm speaking in in my normal accent, I'm Japan. Research has also shown that adult third children have a higher level of education, with most of them pursuing master's and doctorate degrees. Again, because we travel around, we are exposed to so many different cultures, we end up getting intellectual hobbies or just developing an intellectual wanting to know more about the world because we're just curious about the world more. We are also problem solvers. Research also shows that and this was conducted in a survey, when they are facing difficult situations, nearly 90% of the respondents agree that they can always find a solution. By the way, I will be linking down the information or the links of the studies where I got all of these information for, if you guys were curious. Now, here's the big question. Why is identity so important? Identity is important because it is who we are. It is the basis of the person we are. Identity refers to our nationality, our gender, sexuality, work, hobbies, and more. Identity is basically who we are. And our childhood shapes our identities and our work and hobbies so much. And if we cannot sense who we are, then how can other people figure out who we are? I know it sounds confusing, but identity is who we are basically. And as I said earlier, culture is the most basic thing that ties people in society together. Culture forms a large basis of your identity and plays a big role in shaping who you are and who you become. If you cannot figure out your culture, you will have a hard time figuring out your identity. With culture, people ask you questions like, which language do you speak? Where do you come from? What is your hometown? And if I cannot figure out these questions, how will the other person know who I am? I tell people that my mother tongue is Hindi. And technically, when it comes to speaking, Hindi and English are the most comfortable languages for me. But when it comes to reading and writing, I find English way more comfortable. But the reality is that English was actually the third language I learned in my life. I learned Hindi and Japanese before I started learning how to speak English. How can a language that I spoke, that I learned third, become my first language? And this leads me to saying that it is okay to feel lost. I have spent a huge time wondering who I am, and even after writing a 90-page thesis, I am still wondering who I am. I have a lot of questions that I have answered, and I have a lot of questions that I have not answered. I have also felt guilty or have felt shamed for liking Japan more than India. And I want to say it is normal to feel guilty, and you should not feel guilty. A lot of people have asked me which country do I prefer more, and I'll always say Japan. And I remember I used to feel so guilty for saying Japan because I am Indian, but Japan is my home. I grew up here. I've lived my entire life here. Of course, it's going to be more comfortable to me compared to India, where I was just born. I go to India once a year for a couple of weeks to visit my family. Japan is my home. It is also normal to feel like an alien species in your own native culture. Like I said, sometimes I have a hard time connecting with Indian people, and I have found that I fit better with other adult third culture children, and it is completely normal. This does not mean that I don't like Indian people, or I don't like Japanese people, or I don't like a certain group of people. It does not mean I cannot talk to them, I can't converse with them, or I cannot completely relate with them. It just means that their experiences and my experiences are very different. One thing about adult third culture children is that we spend so much of our time trying to relate to others and trying to understand others that we don't realize ourselves that it is okay if we don't understand everyone. It is okay if we don't relate to everyone. There are 8 billion people on this planet. Not everyone's gonna like you, and not everyone's going to be you. It is okay to like one culture more than the other culture, and you should not be feeling guilty about it. You should not be feeling bad about it because it is who we are. It is what our lifestyle and what our childhood has led us to believe in. Being a third culture child is a very unique experience, and of course, it is a consequence of our childhood, but I'd like to think of it as a positive consequence, as a natural consequence. It is fine. People might shame you or judge you for your lifestyle or for the choices you make, but you have to realize, and so do they, that you have lived a very different lifestyle as compared to normal people do. And that is completely normal and completely fine. Most of my friends are also other third culture children, and we often have the same experiences, even though they're of completely different nationality of mine. And I have the best time with them as compared to I might with someone who is not a third culture child. I want to tell you guys that it is okay if you cannot balance the multiple versions of you, and it is also okay if you have differing opinions than your family. You can be two things at the same time, and it's fine. You're normal, we're all normal. We're just our own individual, unique third culture child. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope this kind of helped you figure out who you are and where you stand in this world, like it helped me. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.